very excited about this. What a great title. What your awareness program can't fix and how you fix that, from John Scott, who many people will know and will have learned from at other summits, and of course in his role as a SANS associate instructor. John has a variety of roles, including being head of security education at the Bank of England and his role as a SANS associate instructor. So John always has fantastic information and learning and insights to share with us. And this is a really intriguing session, because what John, if I'm right, what John is speaking about is not just awareness being the answer. So often I think awareness is touted as the answer to everything when it comes to managing human risk, but we all know that that's not enough. So John is going to be talking us through what awareness can fix, what it can't fix, and what it can't fix, well, what you can do instead, with an emphasis on taking the burden off people and drawing in research, I think, from the safety field. So there's going to be lots of great stuff shared with us, and I can see, John, you've joined us now. Welcome.
Hey everybody, thanks very much for that fantastic introduction. Oh, so good morning everybody. Let me start with a story. So back in September last year, my wife and I are trying to get both of our kids out to school. They go to one to nursery, one to school. They go in different directions. So around 7:45, it's always a little bit fraught. And my wife couldn't find her keys. So she looked in her handbag, she looked in the key drawer, and we're trying to get everybody out. Tensions are high. As you can probably guess what happened, I opened the door and there were her keys in the outside of the front door where they had been all night, where she'd left them overnight. And now, being a seasoned security awareness professional, as Oz and Jess just said, I knew what I had to do. The fact that we needed to get the kids to school wasn't important. I sat her down. Well, I confiscated the keys first, absolutely. She'd proven that she couldn't be trusted with them. I sat her down and I kicked off the 90-slide Keeping Our Home Safe presentation that I have ready at any point for such an emergency. And at the end, I made sure that she was able to answer my multiple choice quiz. She got 9 out of 10. She did very well. And then at about 9:45, we were able to actually take the kids to school. And that's why I slept on the sofa for a month. So who am I? As Jess and Oz just said, my name's John Scott. I run the security education program at the Bank of England. I have been doing so for about 6 years. I'm also very honoured to be a SANS instructor teaching Management 433, hence the branding. I thought I'd go corporate today. I'm an awareness advocate, I guess. I'm very, very passionate about this. But a lot of what I want to talk about today is exactly as the question says, what do our awareness programs get asked to fix, which isn't really appropriate. I should also say, as Bart Simpson so eloquently puts on this blackboard there, this is all my own opinion and does not represent the official views of the Bank of England or the SANS Institute. So let me finish the story. Obviously, I did not subject my wife to a 90-minute presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. What we actually did is we looked at what we needed to do, which was get the kids to school. So I took the keys out of the door, handed them to her and said, here they are. Now, why did I not take that further? Why did I not run her through mandatory security training? Well, there's 3 reasons, really. Number one, she knew not to leave the keys in the door. Me banging on about it or having a go at her for it is just going to cause an argument, right? So I'm going to annoy her by telling her something that she already knows. Number 2, the key task at that point was to get the kids to school. Yeah, that was our business, if you like. That was what we talk about with our 5-year-old. That was our focus task. That was the one thing that we needed to get done. And me trying to stop that happening would have stopped the business of our house going ahead. And number 3, and I think this is the most important thing, I had done the same thing 2 weeks previously. So I really had no moral high ground whatsoever to lecture her on leaving keys in the door. What had happened? Whatever had happened coming in the night before, when she was coming in through the door, bringing one of the kids in, dealing with the cat, whatever it was, she'd got distracted. And that's exactly what had happened to me 2 weeks previously. I'd got distracted. And we know not to put the keys in the door, not to leave them in the door, but at the moment that our process says, take the keys out of the door, put them in the pocket, put them in the bag, put them in the drawer, whichever it is, something happened. And that's what I want to address. So before I do though, I'd like to introduce this quote. When we talk about security, I went to a conference and they said, oh, I was talking about cybersecurity culture or security culture. And they said, oh, we asked a question of all of the participants and, you know, you can see the results here, so we can talk about that. And what they said is, if we define a healthy cybersecurity culture as clear policies about acceptable online behavior. And the first thing I said is, well, that's not culture. Culture is what we do, the way we do things here. And it includes things like policies, but it has to include so much more, and it has to include an understanding of humans. So when we talk about culture, the first thing I just want to say is it has to be much more holistic than just policies. And I wouldn't normally use this quote, but this was actually quite a well-known IT managers conference in the UK. And for them to fundamentally misunderstand what culture is, I thought was really interesting. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about human error. Sorry, my keyboard is clicking twice when I want it to click once. We're talking about human error. We've got the Evergreen ship blocking the Suez Canal there. And then I dug into to try and credit it properly. I dug into where it was, and it's actually a screenshot from Microsoft Flight Simulator, would you believe? So Microsoft allowed you to fly around the ship, which was great. Now, I'm not sure that the truth of what happened with that ship will ever come out. Obviously, there's a load of legalese and lessons were learned and NDAs have been signed and so on. So we'll never quite know. But what we can say, whether it was a pilot error, whether it was the captain's error, whatever it was, there was human error involved. But that's not enough. We can't just say human error, because we have to understand the circumstances that the error occurred in. And there is a lovely, a fantastic book by a guy called James Reason. It's called Human Error. And he talks about slips, lapses, and mistakes. And this is really fundamental to what I want to talk about. We have to understand the differences between the sorts of human error that we're going to encounter. Because if we only talk about human error, we don't have enough information to properly fix the problem. And Reason's book, and I'm going to recommend 3 books to you today. James Reason's is one of them, has this fantastic quote: operators tend to be inheritors of system defects created by poor design, incorrect installation, faulty maintenance, and bad management decisions. Their part is usually that of adding the final garnish to a lethal brew whose ingredients have already been long in cooking. Now, he was talking from the safety industry, and a lot of his research is safety industry based. But I think he's fundamentally, the lessons that he's researched and taught about over the years are ones that we can apply to security. I'll give you a very simple example. We all say, don't click on phishing emails. That's a bad thing. Don't do it. Any phishing email in my inbox has beaten your technical defenses. So we wouldn't talk about firing the person who configures the firewall or the secure mailway gateway when an email comes in. Why do we treat our end user, that last line of defense, why do we treat them any differently? They've made an error, but let's find out what sort of error it was. So before I move on to them, here's my second book recommendation. And this is the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. What Kahneman was talking about, he's an economist, and back in the day, early 90s, people always used to say classical economics, people always make rational decisions. People buy things because it's the right thing to do. It's the most efficient use of their money. And a moment's thought, that behavior we see in sales and so on would lead you to believe that maybe that's not true. So Kahneman looked at what's now called behavioral economics, and his book Thinking Fast and Slow, based on a lot of other people's research, basically said our minds work in 2 ways: system 1 and system 2 thinking. Now, system one thinking is that fast thinking. It's heuristic. It's the rules that we already know. It's the things that we've already done. So if you imagine going and buying some beans from the grocery store, I always buy Heinz baked beans. I don't have to make that decision. I don't have to think about it. Steve Jobs very famously said he always wore the same thing because he didn't want to waste time thinking about what to wear. So he always wore his black polo shirt because then he didn't have to think. That's a system one approach. I'm going to do this thing because it saves thinking time. In unfamiliar circumstances, we have to go into system two. System two is when we use our previous knowledge of other things. We use a lot of mental energy to actually decide how to behave in a particular, usually in very new circumstance. And it's slow. And from a cognitive point of view, it's expensive. And we are, I love this phrase, we are cognitive misers. We want to reduce the amount of energy we spend. And this is a very big user of energy. We want to reduce the amount of energy we spend so that we've got the energy we need for those unforeseen circumstances. So system one, system two thinking. Fishers use this a lot. They want you to do system one thinking. They want you to click on the link that looks like google.com because you know that clicking on the link google.com is legitimate. So how do they get you to do that? So the first thing that Reason talks about when we talk about when we talk about errors, is he talks about slips. Now, a slip is an execution error. I'm trying to do something, but I don't quite do it right. And quite often they're perceptual failures. So I don't know, I'm using an example of a photo on there of a car almost running a bike over and probably likely to. In the UK, this is known as a sorry, I didn't see you, mate error. And that's actually how most motorbikes will talk about it. And there's a perceptual thing that goes on with our eyes. We have, instead of seeing a video, what we see is a load of stills, and then our brain fills in the gaps between them. And the gaps in between are called this thing called saccades. And if a motorbike is small enough and fast enough to fit within one of those saccades, it's actually invisible to us. Our eyes just go, there's nothing there. And that's the, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Because the driver might be looking, they've done the right thing, but this is why, again, in the UK, you hear look left, look right, look left again. What you're trying to do is basically make your eyes take in the full picture, not just what you think you've seen. And again, that Google error, if I'm clicking on google.com, but the first O has been changed into a 0, and I don't notice that. I know I shouldn't click on poor links, but I just haven't noticed the difference. Another example of that, which some of you may well have seen, if I won't play the video, but there's a basketball game where you're supposed to count the number of bounces, and spoiler, but it has been around for a while. In the middle of the game, a person in a gorilla suit walks in and back, and then you ask people how many bounces, and they go, oh, 5, maybe 6, da, da, da. Then you say, did you see the gorilla? And I ran that in a class once, and people were absolutely certain that I had 2 separate videos because they had not seen this thing at all. That's that slip, okay? Lapses are when you forget to do a step in the procedure. So you know that you should be doing this thing, but actually maybe you're rushed, maybe you're hurried, and leaving the keys in the door is a lapse. We haven't got a written procedure in my house. I'm not quite that bad. We haven't got a written procedure for how you come into the house, but everybody in their heads pretty much has a, open the door, take the keys out, put them in the pocket, usher small child in if small child is appropriate, and so on and so forth. And the key point here is that if we get interrupted, we can actually forget a step. So we can actually say, yes, I've done all the steps, when actually the keys are still in the door, metaphorically speaking. And this is, again, one of those things where a hacker is going to try and get you at a time when you're busy, get you at a time when your attention is short. I clicked on a phishing email once, actually tapped on a Netflix free account one, because my phone, I was on the tube, the London Underground, my phone, I came onto the platform, I had signal for about a minute and a half. And of course, all of my emails just go ping, 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 ping. And I start scrolling through them really quickly, knowing that if there's anything I need to respond to, I'm going to have to step off the train. So I'm going through them fast, and I click on a link. And luckily, Bitly because the Packers had used a bit.ly shortcut. Bit.ly said, hey, we think this is a dodgy link. Are you sure you want to proceed? And I went, oh, you're right. No, I'm not. But that's exactly that slip. I didn't do my due diligence. Why would Netflix send me to a bit.ly link if I'd hovered? I missed that step in my process because I was under pressure. And then the third thing, and this is the thing that our awareness programs are supposed to fix and do fix, a mistake from James Reason's point of view is a lack of knowledge. So in the image we have on here, it is the, neither the tattooist nor the tattooee know how to spell regrets. So they let the whole tattoo go on without, I'm pretty sure this is photoshopped. I'm hoping that's not a real photo, but they let the whole tattoo go on without saying, hey, are you sure that's how it's spelled? And one of the things, to give you a real world example, one of the things that we had that was the sort of genesis of this talk is we were in an instant review forum, and I'll talk more about that later. But we're in an instant review forum, and somebody said, oh, well, somebody's left a bag on the train with some sensitive documents in it. You should do a bank news story. You should do an intranet story to say, don't leave your bag on the train. And I had to push back really hard to say, it won't make the slightest bit of difference. Because if I send that story out to 5,000 people, most of them will read it and go, of course you shouldn't leave your bag on the train. This was not a lack of knowledge problem. And that's what many of our awareness programs are designed to fix. I don't know what a phishing email looks like. Now I know what a phishing email looks like. I'm not going to click on it again. I would argue that most of us would accept that isn't actually the case. So the title of the talk, what your awareness program can't fix? Your awareness program will find it very difficult to fix slips and lapses because they are not knowledge-based problems. They're not even desire-based problems. If we talk, we're going to hear from BJ Fogg later, and his model, talks about motivation and ability. This is neither a motivation or an ability issue. It is at the moment that the behavior is carried out, something goes wrong, an error occurs, whether it be that perceptual error or whether it be doing the wrong thing, not seeing, or missing out a step, rather, that memory error. So why does that happen? There's three things that I want to talk about. Number one is cognitive biases. We all have them. We all make mistakes. We all make judgments. We all try and carry out our plans with somewhere in the region of 180 different identified cognitive biases going on at any one point. The image that's on screen, by the way, I'll put a link into Slack because it's just from Wikipedia. It goes into an awful lot of detail, but the thing I really want to call out is that the cognitive biases basically fall into four categories. And the reason this is important, if you go back to the system 1 versus system 2 thinking, once we start hitting one of these categories, is there too much information? So I'm getting overwhelmed. Is there not enough meaning? So I'm going to have to guess. Do I need to act fast so I don't have the time to think it through? Or am I not entirely sure what I should be remembering here? The really important thing is, once one of those cognitive biases rears its head, it is much more likely that we start slipping into system 1 thinking. We start doing the things that we have done before because we know they have worked before. So hovering over an email might be something that works all the time, and you go, that's fantastic. And then you find out that your firm has brought in Proofpoint or whatever it is, and they make it really difficult to see what the base URL is. It says URL defense, and you go, and now I don't know. I've got too much information. So cognitive bias, number one, is one of those things that will potentially cause us to have a slip or a lapse, or even a mistake. Number two is risk assessment. Those of you who've done 433 know we use this example in the class, but we traditionally, people are scared of sharks. They're not scared of mosquitoes, even though mosquitoes kill more people in a day than sharks have killed in 100 years. Why? Because mosquitoes are little, and because, you know, you get tetanus or bites and it's itchy and it's horrible, but it's not, doesn't feel like it's going to kill you. The malaria that you might get down the line, or the other diseases that they can carry, is what's going to kill you. So sharks, big teeth, scary. Mosquitoes, annoying. And yet, in terms of deadliness, we know that the mosquito is much worse. And when we look at the internet, the thing we talk about the same thing. The error that's going to happen, the issue, the incident, the breach, whatever it is probably far removed from me actually clicking on a link. So there isn't an immediate reaction to my consequence. There isn't an immediate consequence to my action. So we're bad at those risk assessments. That's number 2. And number 3 is this guy. I know I saw people saying yesterday, oh, hackers in hoodies, da, da, da. I'm just putting this slide in for those of you who are playing security awareness bingo at the back. So the hacker in the hoodie, but what am I talking about here? The fact that, unlike safety, and this is a big difference between our work and James Reason's work, unlike safety, we assume a malicious attacker for an awful lot of the situations that we're in. There is somebody out there who is deliberately trying to make people make slips, lapses, and mistakes, who is trained in them. And James talked about James talked about marketers and social engineers using exactly the same techniques, and he's entirely right. Everything that I've talked about could just as easily be applied to a slightly non-ethical marketer trying to make you to make the wrong choice. The ethical ones, people like James, obviously trying to help you make the best choice. And then the final thing, and again, somebody mentioned this when we talked about errors yesterday, James Reason actually talks about deliberate and non-deliberate errors. And a deliberate error can be that classic insider, somebody is trying to hack you, but it could also be somebody who is doing something that doesn't fit best with security, but actually fits best with the business. So in my example with the keys, it's our job is to get the kids to school now. We've got the keys, we've secured it, we've locked the house, fine. Let's get the kids to school. And the photo, I've used this on a number of SANS presentations because I love it so much. If a guy's business model is taking custard pies in the face, our advice to duck is not useful to them. So from our perspective, ducking is the right thing to do and not ducking is the error. And yet they're not going to duck. So if we don't understand the businesses that we work with, our advice is not going to be as useful to them. So that's the problem. If we actually take all of these things into account, are humans the weakest link? Buzzword bingo number 2. And I think the answer is yes. But I'm not sure it's always the humans who get blamed who are actually the weakest link. So what can we do about this? Number 1, human error is inevitable. If there is a human being involved in a process, then at some point that human being or some human being involved in the process will make an error. It's just going to happen. That's all of research that James Reason did over 30 years says human error is inevitable. So let's be aware of that. I don't know how many of you know this screen grab. This came from a story from Citibank, who were making repayments on interest. They wanted to send out somewhere in the region of $7.8 million worth of payments. Sorry, just checking my notes off the side to get the numbers right. What they actually did is they sent out 500 million. In such a way, and it's a long, complicated story as to why, but in such a way that the people they sent the money to, who it was their money, said, no, we're not going to give that back. Why did that error happen? Well, you can see there's a code against the principal there. That's an account code that you need to fill out. But it also needs to go into the front and the fund fields. And the person who filled this out didn't know that. Neither did their manager, who signed it off. Neither did the senior manager who signed it off. So we talk about 4 eyes and 6 eyes defense. This went through all of those. Why is it take filling the same information out in 3 screens to do something where it's a really big thing? Or why not have something which says, hey, this information, you do realize this is going to do X, this information is going to go Y. Tim and Rebecca are going to talk a little bit more about how you do those sort of directed interventions a little bit later on. But this cost Citibank somewhere in the region of $490 million because of very, very poor interface design. Now, we're the custodians of human risk. We are the people who, when we talk to our colleagues and they say, oh, do you know what, John, this just doesn't work. We are the ones who can go back to our technology teams, to our interface designers and say, you are causing a problem here. This mistake happened because the technology isn't as human focused as it could be. Can we fix that? So number one, can we fix the technology? Number two, and this is my final book suggestion, the Checklist Manifesto, which is an absolutely fantastic read in terms of fixing process failures. Because one of the things that's come out over the last 20 years of sort of human research, again, is if the process is wrong and people follow the wrong process, then how do we fix that? The Checklist Manifesto came out of medicine, for example, where you can do all the steps possible to cut off my left leg, but if I actually came in to have my appendix dealt with, then that isn't helpful. So when we talk about the about errors, people under pressure take shortcuts. But if we train them to work to the processes, and if we make sure that the processes are accurate and they're appropriate, and we feed back when they're not, we find out when people are making errors, then we'll see fewer of those sorts of errors. We'll see different ones. Instead, human error is inevitable, remember, but we'll see fewer of them. And then the final point is that we need to treat adults like adults. Adults and children learn in a very different way. But one of the things that children are really good at is root cause analysis. Why? 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 How often do we do that? We start the conversation, or we finish the conversation so much when we talk about instant reviews with human error. And that should be the start of the conversation. What sort of error? What are the circumstances? Why did they make that mistake? Is this a problem that's happening elsewhere? All of these are root cause questions that we have to talk about. And quite honestly, we're not always talking about best decision making. Sometimes we're talking about least worst decision making. And what was the circumstance that they were in? And that caused it. So my very final slide, because it would be great to have a minute or so for questions. My very, very final slide, the summary of all of this is, if your awareness program is being asked to do stuff, you need to be in that room. You need to be in your instant review processes. You need to be in those follow-ups. And you need to be in the position where you can push back and say, was this a human error? Yes, great. What sort? And how do we fix it? Because education, as much as I think it's important, is not the answer in every circumstance. So be in that room. Thank you all very much.
Fantastic, John. Absolutely loved that. And so did, I can tell, like the community absolutely responding so positively to that. You're getting so much positive feedback, comments, questions in your Slack hallway. So thank you so much for sharing those insights.
My pleasure.
If your business model is to take a custard pie in the face, it's no use if we tell you to duck. One of many great quotes I have taken from that. I'm going to quickly jump into a question that we've had through. Really interesting question. From your experience on this journey, this piece of work, what are the main variables you're finding that influence human error?
So, there's fantastic. Time of day is without a doubt, because there's so much work. I had some really fantastic conversation with a researcher over at Bath about hunger. And in fact, one of the things that is called out in Thinking Fast and Slow is about judges who make poorer decisions just coming up to lunchtime. So you know, again, one of the really key things that I learned from Thinking Fast and Slow, that classical economics model of we always make the rational decisions is obviously rubbish, right? And the thing that I would bang on to people again and again and again, it's a really simple catchphrase: security is situational. So we have to look at what are the circumstances in individual cases and see what we can actually learn from them. But the first question I always ask is, when did this happen? Because generally human errors happen when there is an outside pressure of some sort, right? So either it's time to go home, or I'm on a tube and I need to change platforms and I've got 30 seconds. You know, that's the point where I'm going to forget my bag, right? Because that's the point where if I don't remember, it has the biggest consequence. We can tell people, look after your bags. Absolutely, they know that. Nobody chooses to leave a bag on the train. But without that understanding and saying, hey, if you're going through, I'll give you a very simple example. We've started coming back into the office. So our story now is, if you want to go to the pub afterwards with your mates and you're taking your bag, you need to pay more attention to it, because you've been at home for 14 months. So there's a really key thing that we can predict. And, you know, without telling too many secrets, we were right. But that's a relevant lesson, right? If we just said something saying, if 6 months ago, if we put up something saying, look after your bag when you go to the pub, and people going, oh, chance would be a fine thing, right? If we do it in 6 months' time, when people have got back into that routine, it's less useful. But it's that understanding, when are those changes? What are those transition points? And that's when the risk increases. And that's when those interventions are useful, especially if they're predictable.
Very cool. So looking at the circumstances and how we can apply those interventions.
Yep.
John, this is fantastic, and you will see when you get into your hallway, but not just the comments, but actually some of the questions and points. Maybe if I could bring you back to something that I've heard you say before. I suspect some people here would just listen to you and just gone, aha, which is this idea that actually culture isn't just putting things up, or indeed even maybe some of the security practices or things that we want people to do, but culture is what actually happens. And if you combine that with the inevitability of human error, what is it that stops us as security professionals from a kind of grappling with the reality of the fact that people are making mistakes? Why is this taking so long for us to kind of adjust programs as a result?
I think there's a very natural human reaction to blame. Whose fault was it? And to point fingers. And I think, and a lot of this goes back to the sort of curse of knowledge and so on. If stereotypically, if you're a security practitioner and you know to do the right thing, and you never click on a phishing link and so on and so forth, it takes quite a lot, and Jess used this word earlier and others have, it takes quite a lot of empathy to be able to say, well, I don't make that mistake, but I think about security a lot. And actually, I do make the mistake. That's why I start with that story about the key in the door, because the punchline is I did the same thing, right? And I think about security a lot. This is my day job. So I think having that empathy, that ability to see that inevitability, and that's why I'd like going back to the science. And James Reason's book is brilliant for this, because he has got, by the time he'd written that book, he's got about 30 years of research, and just being able to say to people, all the science shows that human error is inevitable. So now what? What do we do about that? Well, we can sack everybody who makes a mistake, but we know that's not going to work. So we have to accept, and we have to go forward. We talk about not a secure culture, but a just and secure culture at the bank. And I'm not saying that we're 100% there yet, but it has to be those two things. If we want a secure culture, people come forward when they make a mistake. They will only do that if they think there is a just culture as well, that will be taken into account. So we actually have that in our conduct policy. It specifically says coming forward is taken into account positively, so that people can point at it and says, your policy says this, you have to do it. And we go, yeah, we do. Because if we don't, you won't come forward. You know, it's the thick of it line. It's not the cock up, it's the conspiracy. Someone makes a mistake, someone causes an error. Okay. If they try and hide that, that's almost certainly where the problems will start occurring. Because if nothing else, we can't help them fix it. So long rambling answer to your thing, to your question, but I think it's that if we have to have that empathy, we have to have that understanding that error is inevitable, and then say, and then what?
Yeah.
And if we can't do that, then we're always just going to be butting heads with our colleagues.